Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. In this episode I'm going to be looking at these two mainline warships. This BR green one, 824 High Flyer, and a BR blue one, 827 Kelly, which I purchased both of these as non-runners for a very cheap price, and they've been sat on the shelf waiting their turn, and I thought I'd get around to do them and have a look. So I'm just going to dust off the cobwebs and dust that have been accumulated while they've been in my workshop. Then I'm going to put them on the track and see if there's any life in them. Now you can see I've got some controller leads set up this time. But the BR blue one, Kelly, is absolutely dead. No signs of life whatsoever. The motor's not even attempting to turn over. And obviously the gears are cracked on the axles, so it's freewheeling. But it should still pick up, but there's nothing at all with that one. So I'll test the green one, High Flyer, and see if there's anything with this. And despite being sold as a non-runner, this one is actually trying to go. You can see the light in the end there. But the fact that the gears are cracked, the motor's just spinning and not actually giving it any traction. So we'll strip these down and see if we can't get them running. Now it will flip between both of them, but they are identical. So the methods I use can be interchanged between any mainline warship. To remove the body shell, there are two screws just underneath the fuel tanks, and when they're removed, you can see the wiring. Now one of the securing things there had broke off for the screw, so I'm going to glue that back in later, because I really do need that, because if not it will just flap about and put stress on the other one. So I'll glue that back in. Other than that, the body shells are in quite good condition, apart from the yellow on the blue one, which has been crudely repainted, is very thick, and this horrible silver paint's all over the roof, so we're going to have to address the cosmetic issues with Kelly. So again, remove the body shell, and it becomes immediately apparent why this one didn't run. Is because one of the wires has actually broke off, the solder joints come off. So that should be on there, so no wonder that didn't work. So I'm going to put a battery directly over the motor terminals, see if there's anything. And it did try and turn then just a little bit, so the motor's not completely dead. So to remove the there's also broken and missing buffers on these chassis. So I did end up getting a spare chassis with complete with all buffers. So I'm going to salvage some parts off this to make these two good. So to remove the motor bogie, you have to remove this retaining piece that sits between the brush retainers by removing the screw, and the plastic bit will come out. And then snipping the wires, because I am going to DCC fit these. I won't be replacing the lights in this video, I will just be DCC fitting them to get them running. Then the motor bogie falls out, and you can see there the wheels are free spinning and they should be solid. So I just unclip the bogie frame, and that gives you access to the gear train, and in fact that gear is completely missing. So it's obviously been taken off in the past, or it's just corroded away. This one here is split and is moving freely on the axle. So that's not good. We're going to have to find replacements for these, and they're not easy to come by. There are some 3D printed ones, but we'll have a look at the replacements later on. Now you can see the crack in the gear there. So I'm going to strip the motor bogie down by removing the screws that hold the brush retainers. It's advisable to put your thumb over the brush retainers while you do this, because the force of the spring will push itself out, and you don't want to lose the springs to this model. The brush springs on the warships are special shortened springs, so that they don't put too much pressure on the brushes. You also have to undo these two screws here at either side of the where the armature sits, because these will allow you to separate the motor casting. And this red stuff was like a tamper-proof paint that Mainline put on, so I don't think this has ever been opened up before, this motor, because this was all intact. Taking the motor cover off, there's the gear train, there's the armature, 3-pole motor. And then another problem becomes apparent. This gear here is actually missing a tooth entirely. So this blue one's putting up a bit of a fight, and you'll see through this video, the blue warship Kelly does fight me every step of the way. That gear there is actually seized on. The brushes are stuck to the commutator with our horrible black gunk, so that will all need cleaning up. But this gear here is actually seized on. Now I did imagine when I first took this apart that it had been glued in position, but it's not. It does come off eventually. It's just old lubrication that's acting as an adhesive, and it does pop off. Now that small white washer you can see in there, do not lose those. They are essential. They go on the armature. Easily lost, but luckily if you know what you're doing, you just make sure you don't lose them. So the armature and commutator was cleaned up with my normal method of cotton bud and meths, and all the gears were cleaned up. The gears that I deemed to be good enough, I did check them all on the model. I believe the blue model is older than the green one because the older models have got the white gears, whereas when we take the motor apart on the green model, they are black gears, and I believe they're the later ones. So I also clean up all the brushes, the motor housing, get rid of all that carbon deposit and all the gunk. You can see there just how much dirt's coming off this. And then I'm going to put the gear train back together as best I can for now, just so that I don't lose any pieces. And the gears that I can use are all back in place. And I did put a small amount of Labelle 106 grease on those gear spindles. So I had a look, and initially I thought I could be cheeky and rob the gears out of this old smashed up mainline peak. I thought, well, the gears might be similar, you know, economy measures from mainline, they might have used the same gears for multiple models. And although some of the gears were exactly the same size as the warships, when I fitted them it didn't run, because even though the gears were the same size, the teeth spacing was different. In fact, the peak gear had more teeth on the gears than the warship, so it didn't actually work. Even though I fitted it here, it does fit, like I say, but it wouldn't mesh properly and wouldn't run. So I came against the obstacle, so I got my tray out full of motor gears, or cogs as I've written on there, and I searched through all these to see if I could find a spare or a replacement for that one that was missing the tooth. And even though I've got gears in here from various different models, none of them, none of them came close. I had some that were roughly the same size, but the hole was too big, or they didn't have the spur gear on the back. So that was a great shame. So now you can see this is the green, this is High Flyer's motor, and the gears in here are black, and this is a later one. And I've got no missing teeth, but again the axle gears were split and they were turning on the axles, so these all need replacing. It's a very common problem with the mainline warship, having split gears on the axles. So I serviced the green motor, or the High Flyer's motor, the same way, cleaned the commutator, small amount of lubrication because the armature actually spins in the plastic housing, so I did put a little bit of oil on that just to give it the best chance, you know, because there's no bearing in it or anything. And with the battery test, this motor now runs lovely. So as I said, I'm going to DCC fit these models, and it should be quite simple. But I really do need to try and find some gears. So I went onto eBay, and luckily enough, somebody was actually selling some gears off the drivetrain off a maroon example. So I bought them. There was only 2 gears. I got them for £1, but one of them is the gear that is the direct replacement for the one missing the teeth. And I had a chat with the seller on eBay, and he measured it for me, and I made sure it was. So at least I can complete the drivetrain on Kelly, if nothing else. So like I said earlier, small amount of Labelle 106 on those gear spindles so they don't seize again. And then the gear train goes on. Now this does go on in a certain way. One of the moulded on gears is smaller than the other one, and that one goes on the top from memory. So the bigger gear goes on the bottom, then the one with the smaller gear, and then the big gear. Once all 4 drive gears are on, the bigger gear goes on. Bigger gear, I was saying that when you're drunk. The bigger gear goes on top and engages with the gear that's on the rear of the armature shaft. Quite a complex little drive really for which should be quite a simple model. And there's one of them nylon washers. Just putting that back on there. Armature in. And like I said, this big gear then sits on there. So lucky really, because I happened to go on eBay at the right time and somebody would obviously strip down a maroon example which had split axle gears, and I managed to bag some replacements for this. So it's all coming on nicely, but I had a word with a mate of mine who is he's a hydraulic nutcase really, Andy. And I asked him if he'd got any spares, and to my utmost surprise, he came up with these. Now these are rare as hen's teeth. He actually gave me 4 ultra scale final drive gear for mainline warships out of his stash. And I genuinely couldn't believe my luck and the generosity of Andy. Now, I worked with Andy for a number of years and he's a good friend. And like I said, he's a hydraulic modeller. And I said, have you got any mainline spares? I never had thought in a million years he'd end up giving me some ultra scale ones. But anyway, they fit on the axle like that. And there's a very tiny grub screw that you tighten up to fasten it to the axle. And then I'm just test fitting it up here. You can see I'm working on the green model now. But I'd put it in the wrong place. So what I'd recommend, if you can ever find any of these, is put it in loose in the motor frame, adjust the gear where you need it, and then when it's in the correct place and everything's held in place, tighten that little grub screw up. Don't over tighten it because you can break it. Indeed, one of mine broke, but it broke and it was secured. But if you break one of those little screws, you're knackered really. And then the insulated wheel was pushed on and the back-to-backs were checked with a digital caliper. Now just giving it a quick test with the power supply leads, and it's turning lovely and that brass gear is engaging. I put plenty of Labelle 106 on that drivetrain, obviously because it's a brass gear rubbing on plastic and I didn't want it to wear it away. But I've done both wheels now, and as you can see, that drivetrain has kicked back into life. One other thing I did on these warships, on the power bogie, as it comes from mainline, there are no pickups on one side. So I robbed the pickups off that peak and put them on the securing lugs on the motor bogie on the side with the wheels without the traction tyres. And this will aid in electrical pickup, and it just gives the model a better chance of running. So the brass part just pushes on the lugs there, and then that plastic retainer is put on the top. And then as you'll see here, I've also DCC fit the model. I didn't film that, you've seen me do that before, and I've added a small wire to that pickup. So orange and grey wires to the motor terminals there. And there you go. There is the pickup now on the motor bogie, which should aid, like I said, it should aid these models in running. Although I do fit stay alive capacitors to both of these because I use AE models decoders in the end. I did change the decoder that from the one you saw in the picture to an AE models one, which has a built-in, it has built-in leads for AE models own stay alive, and it does help. And these models do run actually quite well on digital, as you'll see shortly. So now the gear train on High Flyer is sorted. The bogie frame is clipped back in place. You can see there that Kelly is still in bits in the background. But that's High Flyer's motor bogie all back in place. And to refit this, you have to be careful refitting this. I found on both of these models, the brush retainers and screws have very loose grip. And when you're feeding the motor through the chassis, if you catch the brush retainers, they will move and your springs will ping out everywhere. And that happened to me on several occasions doing this, because the blue model you see in the background took so much longer to do than this green one. I almost gave up with the blue one in the end, but I persevered, and I'll detail that shortly. But here I'm just getting that motor bogie through, making sure none of the wires are trapped. Everything looks good, and then you can replace that plastic retaining lug. Now that goes on one way. There's like a cutout that fits over the bearing. So I'm just adding a small amount of oil to the bearing, well, to the to the shaft in the plastic there. There is no bearing, but as I said earlier, it needs to be lubricated as it spins in the plastic. And then the plastic retainer's put over, screwed into position, and that is the motor bogie back in place where it should be. I'm just tightening that up. And then the next thing I did was remove the non-driven end, the pickup bogie, I just remove that same way, remove the plastic lug, and then I remove the old wires, just desolder the old wires. And then everything was taken apart. The wheels and the pickups were thoroughly cleaned. Wheels with the cotton bud and meths wheel treads and wheel backs. And the brass pickups I actually polished up to a nice shine with some Brasso. Although here I'm using a cotton bud and meths just to remove the fluff and detritus that was all over the pickups. I'm also just amending them, moving them back into the position they should be. So once everything was cleaned up, it was reassembled. There's no gears or anything in this model. One thing I did do to aid pickup on this model was I put, when I did open the casing up, because the casing's empty, I did add 10 grams of weight in there using some self-adhesive tyre weights, just so that it is pressing down on the track for better conductivity. So using some thin TCS wire, I am getting through that now, and I've got some new black stuff on order. Refit the non-driven end, and then bogie frame clips on. Retaining piece was screwed back in, and then I connect the pickup wires to the decoder, and the green warship at least will be ready for testing very soon. Very nice and easy rebuild the green one was, and the high flyer, the green warship, was ready probably about 6 weeks before the blue one. Now, as I mentioned, this yellow paint on the blue one is peeling off. Somebody's hand painted it and it's got runs on it, but then it just flakes off. The whole of the yellow is just flaking off with very little pressure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask the blue body shell, because I don't want to do a full repaint because I have no nameplates or anything. So I'm going to mask up the blue and respray the yellow. Now, as you'll see here, this is when I originally chipped the green one. It's got a Bachmann decoder in it at the moment. So the wires they are a little bit long, but I was only in the testing phase at this point. And you can see there that I've replaced and repaired that screw retainer. And High Flyer is now a runner, DCC fitted with its new ultra scale brass gears, courtesy of my mate Andy. So Kelly was then repainted. Here's the yellow. I've resprayed this with my airbrush and removed the masking. And I did the same rebuild, obviously same model. But then this threw up a curveball. When it was running, it would randomly derail. The driving bogie with the traction tyres on would just fall off at any opportunity. So I took the body shell off, and in the end, it came apparent that it wouldn't even move on straight track without falling off. And this was becoming so frustrating. It took me ages. And it just plops off like a one-trick pony. And it became apparent that one of the wheels on the bogie isn't actually touching the rails. It's riding up. It's not the traction tyres, because they're original mainline models. So I did everything. I'd swapped the motor units over, I swapped the casings, I even swapped an axle in case it was bent, but to no avail. And as a last-ditch attempt, I removed the gubbins and put it in that spare green chassis that I'd robbed the buffers off, and it ran absolutely fine. And looking at it, when I put it up against a straight edge, the blue chassis that originally came with Kelly was twisted, and it was rocking, it was pulling the wheels off one side. So like I said, I swapped everything over into this green chassis, and it ran absolutely superb. As you can see here, it's running on the garden, hauling a load of Mark 1s. I have added some extra weight there with some self-adhesive tyre weights. But I tested this thoroughly for about a week, running like this on and off. No problems at all. The only problem I've got now is Kelly's blue and the chassis is green. So I'm going to have to put it back in this paint booth, and I'm going to have to strip it down again for about the 4th time and spray it, which is what I did. Primed it, rail match blue on the chassis, but the rail match blue doesn't match the mainline blue. They are 2 shades different, as you can see here. So I had a look in the reference books, and I thought I'll weather it. Now, warships have got a tumble home, and looking at the pictures I saw, carriage washing plants wash the body sides, but very rarely touched underneath the sole bar. So, which was quite lucky, really. So I'm going to blend it in with a little bit of weathering. And there are other people on YouTube that do weathering better than me. So I'm just gently spraying frame dirt on it here. So I gave it a light coat of frame dirt, followed by some brake dust. some weathered black, more brake dust, and just gently built up light layers until I was satisfied that it looked okay. I didn't want to heavily weather this. But I also did the bogie frames. Now, I mashed up the pickups and any electrical gubbins, like the armature and everything. I mashed it all up. And I sprayed the bogie frames. Now, you can see that frame dirt's going on there. And I'm just using a low pressure, just blowing it on underneath that sole bar very gently. I'm always critical of my own weathering. I never think it looks any good, but when I've done this, I think you'll find, hope you agree rather, that it does look good. Not forgetting to weather the bogies, and this is it when it's dry. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm adding a pin wash, a panel line wash from very, very thin Tamiya black paint. Now, I've seen my friend Nigel on Woolsrail. He does this, and he's so much better at weathering than I am, than I'll ever be. But using this panel line wash, actually highlighted the details on the chassis here of this warship, which has picked it out quite nicely. Capillary action pulls it into all the gaps, and it works well. But like I said, if you want to see this done properly, go and check out Nigel's channel over at Woolsrail. I do like his weathering. It's a lot better than, like I said, a lot better than what I can do it. But it suffices for what I want it. I should also get some etched nameplates for this now. I think that'd just finish it off. But once the panel lines are done and any excess has been wiped away with a damp cotton bud, the warship was left to dry for a day, and I think you'll agree that weathering, I think I've done quite a good job on that. It looks quite good. There's the panel line washes after they've dried, and here's the model reassembled again on its bogies. And honestly, I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but that is probably some of the best weathering I've ever done, to be honest. I've even picked out the steps in silver where the weathering would get worn off by people climbing into the cab. So here's Kelly running in the garden at last. This warship really did fight me all the way, but we got there in the end. If you've got an engine or anything you'd like to see featured on a future episode of Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. I do offer a repair service, DCC fitting. Any inquiries, send me an email. I'll have a look and get it sent over. So I'll leave you now with both the warships running in the garden. Now, some of the shots, like this one here, you'll see the warship is clean. This is the original footage I took before the warship decided it was going to do its derailing trick. So this is before I then changed chassis. So you will see the blue warship running clean and dirty in the running session. Thanks again for watching Trash to Track. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'm just happy they're both done. It took me too long really to do this. I spent more doing the blue one than I should have done, but it's worth it in the end. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Bye for now.